From team-based battles and first-person arena combat, esports are drawing large audiences of fans with a passion for competitive video gaming, both as participants and observers through platforms such as Twitch. Now, big companies across media and entertainment industries are getting involved, vying for access to an audience that's moving beyond the reach of traditional media. The rapidly maturing esports industry is already bigger than many realise, drawing in millions of users and thousands of more viewers. The overall number of esports viewers and hours are enormous and growing. To further discuss this topic, I'm here with Doug Van Dyke, Media and Entertainment Leader, and Domenic Vermillion, Advisory Consultant, both with Deloitte and both hardcore gamers. Doug, Domenic, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hanish. Glad to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start by giving our listeners a brief background on esports. Can you discuss the evolution and how we got here today? And Doug, I'd love to start off with you on that one.
Sure, no problem. If you think about it, right, this dates back into the 80s, right, with the arcades. So many individuals used to go to, the arcades back in those 80s. I myself didn't do a lot of that. I didn't really get into it until we got some of the consoles, as those remember, Atari 2600, the Atari 5200, right? And then you kind of fast forward it into the 90s. You had LAN parties. And then it was really in the 2000s you got to the multiplayer online. That's when I ultimately joined, that multiplayer online. I played a game called Ultima, and I did that for, a number of years. And then, from there, it's just been expanding over and over. And as we'll talk, I think, probably more about this, right? By 2020, the whole esports market is expected to be, $1.5 billion in revenue, not only from sponsorships and advertising, but with an estimated global audience of just over 600 million fans. I mean, if you think about that, from the 80s until now, it is just morphed, over time. So it's just really interesting. And so, Domenic, I don't know if you have, anything to add to that, but it's been phenomenal to see.
No, just adding to your point, Doug, I think pre-internet days, we saw the progenitor of esports. In 1980, Atari had a Space Invader tournament where over 10,000 individuals participated. And then during the 1990s, Nintendo had contests such as the Nintendo World Championships, which essentially, was a tour that went around the United States that ended at Universal Studios in Los Angeles, where players would compete to beat each other's high score in a custom-made Nintendo cartridge that had one level from RC Pro-Am, which was a racing game, a level from Super Mario, and a level from Zelda. And your score would be a combination of those three.
Yeah, and Domenic, actually, that was all live, right? Because they didn't really have, the Twitches of the world streaming stuff, right, back then. But it was still, as you say, it was an e-sport concept.
Correct. Yeah. Prior to online multiplayer, the only other way to find out, who was the top dog was to just put a bunch of people in the room and have them work on the same thing at the same time, and essentially whoever would finish first or have the highest score would be crowned champ.
That's a brilliant kind of history lesson for those who are not around gaming, and I was hoping that I would be able to give one of you guys extra points for mentioning the Commodore 64, but neither of you did. But never mind. I mean, that was my computer growing up and my first kind of foray into gaming. But never mind. Enough about me.
Come on, Hanish. I did have Pong. Come on. Right?
That's true. Yeah. I was really hoping for the C64 to make it, but there you go. I gave it another plug there. But you talked about these, pretty seismic shifts in terms of where it started in arcade gaming and where it is today, and the amount of sponsorships and titles we got. I mean, there's some big shifts in gaming that we've seen. And what I would love to know is just where technologies, you talked about the internet, but where technologies really shaped those shifts in gaming over the years.
And maybe, Domenic, I'll just jump in here first and wouldn't mind your comments on this. But I think there's a number of things. Everything from, all the movement, and I'll start, where we are today with just the handheld devices and kind of the mobile and social gaming. But then you also look to just the high-speed internet. I mean, you could just do so much more with gaming. I mean, when I was doing online gaming, I mean, I probably can't even tell you what the broadband was. It was dial-up, right? And so, the type of content, the type of graphics that you could push over, the speed of internet back when I was playing to today is just been a phenomenal shift in overall technology. And that's really driving this, kind of deep, immersive, shared gaming experience across all the different genres and demographics.
Yeah, to add to Doug's point, I'm going to second the internet only because certain features like split screen co-op have been largely retired by a lot of games today in favor of online play. Back in the day where two people would sit shoulder to shoulder and one would play as Mario and then the next level the other one would play as Luigi, that's largely fallen by the wayside in favor of having 5 of your friends in a team speak and joining a server with 5 other people from some other part on the planet to play against each other, and that does a much better job of ushering in the top tier talent to play against each other as opposed to being the best person at your arcade.
Yeah, and so you talked both of you kind of talked about that a little bit more of an immersive experience, and for a number of years, and we've seen it and saw a lot of it at E3 and have seen it at places like CES as well, that VR is going to be like the next step of real immersive play evolution in gaming. We're seeing that with certain titles, but are we seeing that come through in esports as well, or does that still have some way to go?
In my own opinion, I think it certainly has a long way to go. I'm a big believer that gamers are still going to want a controller. They're going to want a mouse and a keyboard. If you really do want to get off the couch and pretend like you're throwing a football, I truly believe that you're going to want to go outside and just throw a football. So, Wii Sports or any of the yoga-related things, while it's pretty amazing how far technology has come, I still think it hasn't quite turned that corner yet, but that's only because of the level of dexterity required to play a game like Counter-Strike or Overwatch. And I'm happy to be wrong on that, but it's just not something I've seen yet.
And interesting, just to play off from that, when I was at E3, there's clearly a lot of companies that are still, trying to build this space out. And there was a number of booths, just trying to demonstrate the different technologies, whether it's VR or AR. And I think it just comes down to, as Domenic just said, I think it is a little long ways off yet, because if you think about, right, you got to wear something, you got to, there's additional hardware. And so I'm not certain any company's got the right mix and fix yet in order for that to be mainstream. And so, I think it's something that people really like and it seems really cool, but, it just doesn't have, that full mainstream impact yet.
That's fair. I mean, it certainly sounds like it's a trend waiting to happen, or at least, as you put it, to hit that mainstream in terms of the way that people are really kind of doing immersive gaming. And that takes me to a lot of the kind of trends that we're seeing, and something specific that we saw come out in our most recent Deloitte's Digital Media Trends Survey are directly tied to what we're seeing in esports. So, Doug, can you share some of those trends?
Sure. Absolutely, and definitely share a couple things, and Domenic definitely jump in here. But, as we see it, many businesses in the media and entertainment space, are looking at and seeing how they can capitalize on this. And in our view, esports is really offering a way to reach this new demographic that's been really beyond many companies, grasp. Because as you think about it, right, the demographic right now is 70% are male, ages 13 to 40. 2/3 watch live esports. I mean, that's just phenomenal. And 37% have actually attended a live esport event. I myself, and I'm just on the high end of that age group there, I myself have actually gone to a live esport event, and I see it. I see it happening. I see the shift happening. And within our survey, it actually even suggests an opportunity for, an exponential growth. Nearly half of Gen X respondents say that they actually play video games at least once a week, almost as much as millennials and even Gen Z respondents. And so there's just this whole demographic that they're going to be able to tap into. And, looking at, just the overall viewer habits are just shifting completely. Back in 2017, paid TV subscriptions fell by 3.6 million as cord-cutting viewers continued to shift to streaming in social platforms. And it's this whole streaming of, whether it's Twitch, watching these esport events, or the social platforms, all the mobile gaming. And so it's just all of this kind of combined together is where really a lot of our media trend data is showing us.
I'd definitely say for anyone that's been at E3 will have seen this. But for all those non-gamers out there, Dominic, what's the appeal for esports to players and spectators?
So in my opinion, I think the appeal is to see people who are proficient and competitive at something that can be played at a high level. So if I, turn on ESPN, I may not be a big enthusiast of Scrabble, but I'd love to watch the greatest kids in the country play it against each other. I think generally, I do think if you're predisposed to enjoying video games, you will like it a little bit more. But having said that, I think people who are just competitive in nature will have an appreciation to see something different played at a very high level. There's also the partnerships some celebrities have with well-known streamers that can attract audiences from across the aisle, so to speak. If you're not into Fortnite, or if you're not into Twitch, you might like hip-hop and you might like Drake. So the fact that he decides to play with, one of the leading streamers would be of interest to some individuals. But I also think audiences are drawn to more interactive and immersive narrative experiences, which I think is changing the landscape in a way that people are going to Twitch and YouTube more often and paying for cable less.
Just to take off from that, I think a couple different things in the non-gamer, right? There is a whole aspect of just social, right? It's the interaction and social interaction that, that whether or not it's on a social app or whether or not it's in an e-game, eSports, type of environment that's creating, even this environment for what I would call the non-core, gamers. But then you're also seeing, a lot of whether or not, like Dominic said, the celebrities. But it's also, you're getting, these national sports teams that are now investing in these esports, and it's drawing in those folks that weren't gamers, but now have seen that it's their favorite team investing in an esport. They're curious, and it's drawing them in as well.
Certainly, for the uninitiated to see the appeal from a player perspective, but certainly it will definitely go to surprise a lot of people around just the spectator aspect that the both of you touched upon. I think it'll be really useful for our audience. I think it's going to surprise them with some of these numbers. But how many people we talk about when we really talk about viewers and the kind of channels that people are watching? How big is this thing?
It's interesting, because again, all of us have probably been to a live sport event, whether it's baseball or basketball, right? And, these stadiums can hold 40, 50,000, individuals. And so it's interesting, Valve's 2017 International Dota 2 Championship had 15,000 people in the arena, and so you go, wow, that's impressive. But guess what? There was 5 million viewers watching remotely. That's just phenomenal. When you think about it, and you could take this in a number of different degrees, whether or not it's the, how are you capitalizing on that from an advertiser perspective, or, just engaging with those viewers. Take another one, Fortnite Battle Royale counts 40 million users logging in to play each month. It's the most viewed title on Twitch, with an average of over 140,000 viewers at any given time. Dominic, I'm sure you have, some other numbers and other experiences as well.
One anecdote I'd like to share that I think sums it up fairly well is back in the day, Counter-Strike, which I would say for the purpose of this conversation is probably the single most popular game played competitively, rivaled probably by League of Legends. Games like that were played in LAN centers and shopping malls. And I'll never forget, only a couple years ago, I was in my best friend's living room. We were watching Spike Television, and there was an advertisement for a Counter-Strike Global Offensive tournament that was going to be held at the Barclays Center where the Brooklyn Nets play. And I almost dropped my cornflakes because I couldn't believe how the game and the popularity of esports as a whole had just turned that corner. Frankly, when we were younger, this was not considered cool. So the metrics have changed, and I think the numbers support that. More people are just simply interested in it, and it's done a good job of becoming a lot more popular, whereas, 25 is hardly old. Less than 10 years ago, it was not. It was its own little cabal, I would argue.
Right. And actually, I think I saw some data on this that scheduled in 2018, I know we're halfway through it, but I want to say that there's probably at least 30 or more major esports tournaments that are being scheduled and being planned, all across the world, which is, again, when you think about the number, from back when this all started back in the 80s and 90s, and now we're talking about, these 30 major esports. That's just, that's amazing.
I mean, that really is huge. And just exactly where you're going there, Doug, with regard to just the number of tournaments, I think it was just about 3 years ago, the total prize pool for esports tournaments was around 37 million. And last year, I remember seeing it at 113 million. And just recently, I saw that Fortnite announced their 2019 World Cup and allocated $100 million prize pool for their esports tournament alone. So with the viewership, there's certainly a lot of money. And with that level of growth and popularity, let's get a better understanding of what that means for the market and what it looks like now with those sort of numbers that are being banded around in terms of dollars that are available. Can you guys talk a little bit more around what that means for the businesses that are in the industry and what are they going to do to compete with that?
Maybe, Dominic, I'll start with one and then let you kind of jump in here. And it was interesting. I'll first just make mention of, E3 as, again, when I was there. It was the biggest. I believe Facebook had been there before, but not as much of a biggest footprint as they did this go around. They had a really big site and made a big presence at E3. And I think a lot of it has to do with just, whether or not it's the casual gaming, but also the esports. I mean, Facebook purchased exclusive rights to live stream tournaments, Valve's Counter-Strike, Global Offensive Pro League, and Amazon's Twitch acquired exclusive rights to stream Blizzard's Overwatch League games. So, these are the opportunities that, for companies like those that are, trying to capitalize on and get into the market.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that just in 2018 alone, publishers are launching 3 new North American franchise leagues, the NBA 2K League for basketball enthusiasts, the North American League of Legends Championship Series, and as Doug pointed out, the Overwatch League, which has an exclusive partnership with Twitch. And again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but just as I was amazed to see Counter-Strike being advertised on cable television, once Facebook started to air ads for tournaments of the same kind of nature, I thought that was an interesting partnership between those two. So I know that Facebook has had a presence at E3 prior, but to your point, Doug, they've really upped their game and are bolstering their presence in that sphere.
The other thing that's kind of unique, and again, I'm sure those that are familiar with the esports, I mean, some are trying to analogize to, traditional sports, but, again, unlike pro sports, esports is, organized in leagues with independently owned teams, but, a single publisher controls each esports game. And so there's going to be a lot of new things and nuances that are going to be coming out of, esports that a number of companies are going to have to be grappling with that are different, than the traditional sports. And so it'll be interesting to see, how that all plays out over the next year, 2, 3 years.
Where you're going there, Doug, and just to springboard off that, I mean, like professional sports, we're certainly seeing esports also experience franchises, including 3 new leagues launched this year, as well as sponsorships. And for example, there's an Overwatch League team that's partnered with Lionsgate for a film sponsorship crossover. So certainly, these tie-ups that are happening with franchises, happening with sponsorships, just like you see in traditional sports. So how do you think that has really changed esports and effectively what's in store for the future?
Yeah, what I would say, Hinesh, is clearly around as you think about the franchise model. It's allowing, others to, invest into, this new marketplace. And you're starting to see everyone from, those that are, previous owners of just traditional sports, but even venture capital money. I mean, everybody wants to get into this because they just see the huge upside. And I think it was the New England Patriots owner, Robert Kraft, paid $20 million to secure a team spot, in the new Overwatch League. Or think about the Big Ten Network and Riot Games recently extended their partnership with a two year contract. And so I think this is really creating this, phenomenon around, these different franchises and what this ultimately will look like. And then the one last one I would say is, the New York Yankees actually had partnered with Vision eSports. And so this is just creating, this, kind of this entire shift around the, the franchises in the esports. I don't know, Dominic, if you have any other, view on this, that would be great.
Just to support your point, I would say what this does for esports is help legitimize it. I mean, individuals may not be familiar with the Boston Rising as an Overwatch team, but they would certainly respect, I would surmise Robert Kraft, the New England Patriots organization, and whatever business decisions they feel, were good ones as far as investing in that space is concerned. And the same goes for the New York Yankees. I mean, we're speaking in the realm of baseball. If we believe it would apply to esports, then they've been known for making great trades and signing great contracts for good players. I see no reason why it would be different, than with purchasing an esports team.
Actually, just to play off from that one, I was actually at this conference, and I was listening to this gentleman talk about, he's managing a team, and to your point of everything from what is this going to be about agencies? There's you're going to have players have agents, and then when you acquire these players to be on teams, it's about traveling around and taking care of these players. I mean, it's just an interesting phenomenon as you look at it. It's taking it from the franchise down to even the players, and what you need to do about training and housing, and there's just this whole other facet of interaction with the teams itself. It's just it's quite interesting.
Wow, I mean, it really is fascinating the way that it's going in terms of just some of the parallelism to professional sports and esports. One of the things I want to think about is, and for us to discuss, is we talked a lot about where the history of esports has been, how big it really is, not just from a tournament perspective, the dollars behind it, the franchises, sports, but the spectator side of it and the viewing experience that it also brings. But when we look at some of the opportunities and challenges with esports, what might we expect to see in the future? And let's start off with some of those opportunities.
What I would say is, when as businesses look at this, I mean, it's just the reach, the overall reach, the global audience. Where is the advertising? All of the branding. It's developing, new entertainment venues, the hospitality, overall franchise. I mean, it's somewhat endless, and be able to really just capitalize on this whole shift in media and sport being really shaped by not only the social entertainment, but just the live streaming and high intensity. I mean, if you think about it, my kids are younger, just coming into the teenage year, and all of their content is on their mobile device, whether or not it's watching somebody play esports, or whether or not it's watching a YouTube video or some other user created content. I mean, that's where you're going to have to capitalize on it, and that's where I see a lot of opportunity to be had. Dominic, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I can only contribute to the challenges aspect, because I think when I talk about esports among people, oftentimes they'll stop me and ask me, well, what is the sport? And when I begin to sort of describe what it is, they'll, without batting an eyelash, say, well, that's not a sport. So it kind of becomes the whole, like, every sport is a game, but is every game a sport? And it's an interesting debate, certainly not without controversy. And you've heard people say this about golf as well. I think that's the biggest challenge for esports is that recognition that, it is in the same conversation as, say, a soccer or a tennis. And to its credit, esports will be considered a medal event at the 2022 Asian Games. And it's also been a demonstration sport at the 2018 Olympics. But the International Olympic Committee has voiced some opinions that essentially said they're not going to support things that depict violence. But it's moving towards the zenith that it could reach if it keeps up with that pace.
Yeah, I mean, it's from what you've just highlighted there, Dominic, I think it's only a matter of time, right? If they choose the right event that is non-offensive to everybody, then it's only a matter of time till it qualifies as an official event, right? And then in some ways starting to get parity with some of the other sports.
Agreed, and I think that's actually to FIFA's credit, or some of the sports titles where they shine, is that, when they actually have the NBA commissioner, I believe his name is Adam Silver. I'm still used to saying David Stern, but when they're actually drafting players like they draft actual basketball players, or the tournaments that are held for FIFA are, for prize money that is more than some athletes' contracts, the sports games have done a good job of being accepted globally for that reason. It's still a sport, just a digital version of it, whereas, playing cops and robbers might be a little bit more tough to sell as a sport. But, my guess is as good as anyone's on that. It's hard to predict the future.
So just springboarding off some of those opportunities that you both talked about, I mean, where does that stand in terms of those that are within the ecosystem, be that the publishers, be that those that are owning the leagues, or frankly, some of the titles that are putting up the pretty substantial money for that? I mean, where does that stand in terms of what players within the ecosystem need to be thinking about going forward?
Yeah, so Himesh, as I think I referred to before, right? I mean, you've got this whole global audience and the reach to this, global audience. And I think there's a lot of value that, companies are looking at. And so in this whole esports landscape, companies not only in the media entertainment space, but it's the professional sports space, it's the investor, world. And it's really trying to look to unlocking, kind of all of this advertising potential, developing new entertainment and hospitality offerings. It's really empowering the overall franchise model and creating, enhanced value, growing that modern media, environment. You've got broadcast rights. You got promoting kind of subscriptions, services for physical and virtual goods, game streaming, access to teams. VIP hospitality. I mean, there's just a whole number and a whole host of opportunities that are going to just start morphing as companies just see the number of users streaming and access to that I think is just a huge opportunity that they're going to be able to capitalize on.
This is great stuff. I really want to thank you, Doug and Dominic, for joining me today. What we probably should have done is swap these headsets, put on some gaming headsets, had a game on in the background, and had our podcast off the back of that, and that would have been a true way for us to do this one. But I really do want to thank both of you for joining. And certainly for more analysis on esports, look out for Deloitte's upcoming white paper, which is on esports graduates to the big leagues. Till then, it sounds like there's a lot in store for the future of esports. And for those who have not experienced it directly, from the sheer popularity, you're probably not far away from someone either participating or spectating on esports, or at least from someone doing the latest emote dance, that's for sure. As the Game Over music sees us out, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of User Friendly on esports. See you next time.